Hi, my name is Rob Lett. And so this step is step two. They're here and maybe they're an employee. And what I'm expecting them to do, what our staff was expecting them to do, is they're expecting them to be over here and ultimately become a real estate investor, right? In other words, an entrepreneur. There's a problem with that because over here, being an employee is what some people call safety. Over here, what some people call being an entrepreneur is what some call being risky. And so what we were relying on, and, again, in hindsight is 2020, right? What we were relying on is we were relying on people to be able to see all of the benefits of joining our real estate team and being over here without realizing that that required a huge jump to a person to go from safety to what is at least perceived as risk. Now, don't get me wrong, we had people join our team in droves. We've done very well in the 5.5 years. But again, for all of the workshops and different events that we've had, we really haven't touched as many lives as we would have liked to. And so I finally figured out why. We weren't able to touch as many lives. And the good news is we can fix it. And so hopefully this is going to provide some value to you today. So if nothing else, my goal today with you watching this video is that if you don't, even if you don't end up joining our team, my goal is to be able to provide you some value right here where you are as an employee. And then instead of you having to make the leap from employee to real estate investor, my goal is to be able to provide you some actionable steps where you can start where you are. And instead of this having to be a leap, I can provide you a bridge to where you can safely walk across from being an employee to real estate investor. And so hopefully we can impact more lives as a result. Okay. So let me give you an example of some of the lessons that I've learned from Bob. Okay. All right. So one of the things, I may say this, I may have to come back to this. One of the things that I learned is the good news about working with people who are successful is that, and you've probably heard this expression before. You've ever heard the expression before, show me who your friends are and I'll show you who you are. Well, the good news about, having millionaire friends is that they have millionaire friends. And so I didn't realize at the time that when I was networking, when I was brainstorming with Bob, when he was giving me all this advice and I was listening to him, I didn't realize that I was also gleaning the benefit of all of the years, all of the experience of not just his personal experience, but the experience of some of his friends. And Bob shared with me 5 principles of wealth. And that's really what I want to share with you today. So I'm going to write these down and we're going to keep track of them. Hopefully you got on today's webinar with a pen and paper, because I'd hate to, give you some jewels here and you're not being able to record it. So I'm going to call these, I think there are 5 principles of wealth. Okay. All right. So the first one that I learned from Bob is you have to learn to recover cash, right? So let's talk about that. Okay, let's save that because we'll come back to it. Here's what I mean by recovering cash. This chart here, let's switch colors here for a second. I like red. Okay. All right, let's use blue. That's better. Okay. So what this chart here is showing is the difference between wealthy folks and poor folks. Most of the time when I'm speaking with people who are middle class and poor, I notice, and I was the same way, and I was working a job, is that we're big, on wanting to own stuff, right? Everyone has to own stuff. You hear that a lot. People are like, yeah, I want to own that car in my name, right? That car is in my name. We're pretty proud of that. We pound our chest about that. Hey, that house, man, it's in my name. Right. Well, the funny thing about that is that wealthy people, I know you might be thinking, well, doesn't everyone want to own stuff in their own name? No, actually, no. Wealthy people are totally content being able to just control stuff. They don't want to own stuff, especially in their own name, because there's some liabilities associated with that. I'm sure you know a lot of people, there's a lot of lawsuits and different things that result from people having things on public record in their own name. Okay, if there's anything you probably want to own, it might be cash flow, but let's move on from that. So let's talk about some of these differences here between wealthy folks and poor folks. Okay, so one of the first differences here is usually poor folks, when they earn income, where do they get their income from? It stems from a what? From a job, right? That's usually where they get their income from. And when you go to the HR department and you start working there, what is, they have their form to fill out and all the stuff, so they can determine whether or not they want to hire you. What is one of the first numbers that they want you to put down there so that they can pay you? They usually want you to put on, that form, they want you to put down your social security number, right? Your social security number. Here's what you may or may not know. The minute that you put your social security number down there on that HR form, what you just allowed the government to do is to step in between you and your money. Now, I know you know what I mean when I say the government steps in between you and your money. All of us have had that experience when we got our first paycheck, only to be pleasantly surprised. Well, I should say unpleasantly surprised, right? We look at the check and we say, hey, I made X number of dollars per hour, and I worked so many hours, according to my calculations, I'm supposed to have X, right? But to your surprise, some money has already been taken out of your check. That's because the government stepped in between you and your money. Statistically, what I've heard nationwide is that when you factor in the average tax rate for people who are W-2 wage earners, statistically, you are taxed at the average rate of about 33%. I'm pretty sure you agree with that. Now here, wealthy folks, though, it probably doesn't surprise you that wealthy folks don't use their social security number. We use employee identification number. In other words, we use companies. We use, the employee ID number, right? The federal ID number is like a social security number, but for corporations. And what you may or may not know is that here we have the effective tax rate of 0%. Now, someone might be on the webinar saying, what do you mean 0%? I'll give you an example. If I have rental property, right? If I have rental property and someone is mailing me rent to my company, is there an IRS agent? Is there an IRS agent standing out in front of my house to say, hey, you owe me 33% of that rent check, or do I get a chance to keep 100% of that rent check? I keep 100% of that rent check, right? So at this point, let's just take score of where we are so far. So right at the very beginning, I am operating with 100% of my money. You are operating with 67% of your money. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay. Here, the next part of this is, the sad part is 50% of what Americans do are somehow tied up in consumption. In other words, spending, right? Spending on things like the internet at home, right? Or cable, or on who knows what kind of toys, cars that depreciate in value the moment that you drive it off the lot, right? All in consumption. That's what you see most of the time with middle class and poor people. Wealthy people here, though, instead of consuming, we spend more of our time using money. What do I mean by use money? You've probably heard that phrase. It's not even a phrase, it's just a reality. You've probably seen instances where wealthy people close a lot of deals on the golf course, right? You've probably seen instances or heard of instances where wealthy people end up doing a lot of business at country clubs. Now, why is it that they get golf memberships? Why is it that they get memberships at country clubs? Is it because that they really like playing golf? Do that many wealthy people like playing golf? Is this a prerequisite? No. They do this because when you're an entrepreneur, you'll find that they have a plan to use money with the intent. This is important. They're using money with the intent of making more than they've ever put out. So for instance, a little bit later on, I'm going to explain to you how some people on our team, we pay them anywhere from $1,000 to $10,000 for people that assist us with opening new offices, right? So if I were having someone new who wanted to make real estate investing their career, and perhaps I have them going to a golf course with me. By the time, it's a recreation thing, we're getting a chance to let our hair down and talk business. But by the time, this person decides to join us, maybe I've made $10,000 as a result. It makes my golf fees look negligible. Does that make sense? So I'm only putting money out from now on. Part of your goal should be that you're only putting money out with the intent of being able to bring in more than you ever invested. Okay, so that's use. And then here is 10% goes towards what I'll call LT. This is life tax. Life tax means that's the tax pretty much everyone pays, right? It's just for a living. So if you think about it, the very laptop that I'm recording this webinar on, when I bought it, I paid taxes on it, right? When you register your car in your state, you probably pay some kind of registration or ad valorem tax on it, right? You pay health insurance even now. If you don't, whether you get health insurance or you don't get health insurance, you're going to have a tax on that. There's probate tax, there's property tax if you own it free and clear. Does everyone understand that? You understand that? That's 10%, roughly 10% of everything goes towards this life tax, if you will, 10%. Here's my point. If you were to look at the top, right up here with the wealthy, how much is left for me? What is left for me in terms of my spending ability? I have 40% left to spend. How much is left at the bottom for middle class and poor folks? 7%. Let that sink in for a second. So understand, this is part of what I was referring to earlier when I was talking about that gap. Remember, I was saying that there was a gap and very few people ended up joining our team, and I was scratching my head as why. But when I started looking at taxes, how a W-2 person is taxed versus how entrepreneurs are taxed, it totally made sense, right? Because, what are the odds that a person is going to want to invest when they're only living on 7% of everything that they made? Does that make sense? They're only living on 7%. Here's what's so interesting too, and you've probably heard this before. It's made the news and everything. You remember Warren Buffett made this big thing about the fact that even though he's a billionaire, it's crazy that he actually pays less in taxes than his secretary. Here's part of the reason why. See, when you're an entrepreneur, for me, I when I get my receipts and everything, and I hand them to my bookkeeper per quarter, what I do is I hand them to my bookkeeper, and my bookkeeper looks through all of the deductions, all the deductions that I qualify for. And if there's some things that they can't write off, they give it back to me, and this is what actually becomes my income. Let that sink in. All the stuff that my accountant is not able to write off is what becomes my income. So I actually am taxed only on the 40% that I have left. Okay. So you've been taxed the entire way. Middle class and poor people have been taxed the entire way. We're only taxed, wealthy folks are only taxed on what is left. So by the time I figure out whatever my effective tax rate is, let's just say out of the 40% that is considered my income, maybe 8% is my effective tax rate. So let's just say that maybe 32% is how much purchase power I actually have left. So even if you just analyze that, that means in this instance, can you see that wealthy people have about 5 times more income to be able to play with than middle class and poor? It's no wonder that the middle class and poor or entrepreneurs are willing to invest, are willing to look at other places to diversify or put their money into to help grow, right? Where if you only have 7%, you're not looking at investing in anything. Let's give you some formulas here for a second. Let's before I get down the road, because this is, I just want to show that if nothing else, if you understand this, this is the biggest reason for a person to start their own business. It's important that you understand entities like LLCs, C corporations, S corporations, etc. It's important that you understand how you are taxed in this country. If not, you're paying dearly here, right? But let's give some formulas before I go too far down the road here. Let me save this because there's some things I want you to understand too, right? You've probably heard of something called the rule of 72. The rule of 72 states that you take the number 72 and you divide it by whatever rate of return that you're able to get. And if you do that, the number you will get will equal the number of years that it takes for your money to double. Years to double. Okay, so the question becomes, well, what is the average rate of return for an individual? What kind of rate of return are you getting in your checking account right now? What kind of rate of return are you getting on your CDs? And I know I don't mean to laugh here, but usually when I ask that question live at some of our offices or real estate briefings, people just start kind of giggling to themselves. They're like, man, the bank is paying me like point something, right? They're not hardly getting any rate of return. And I say, okay, that's fine. Let's be fair though, and let's just say that the average rate of return you're getting is 5%. Okay. All right. So if that were the case, then that means applying the rule of 72 divided by 5%, then that means it is taking you on average about 14.4 years for your money to double. Is that a long time? I'd say that's a long time, right? That's the problem, at least part of the problem. But it's even sadder because if you're only living off of 7% of your income, what are the odds that you would take any of that 7% and even invest it so that you would make 5%, only to take 14.5 years for your money to double? Do you see how one problem builds on another? Simply because a person starts off at being a sole proprietor, they're almost destined to be middle class or poor because of that one mistake that they made. Okay, so hopefully you can understand now what Bob was referring to when Bob says the most important part of step one is recovering cash, because this is like being able to plug up that leak. Okay, so that was step one, recover cash. Okay, so step two is strategically engineer wealth. Now, what does that mean? Strategically engineer wealth. Well, many times when I speak to people, again, I was planning on or hoping that someone would come on board and want to be a real estate investor, see the value of becoming a real estate investor. But the truth of the matter is, most people are not ready to become a real estate investor yet. They barely own their own home, right? So let's minimize and get out of this for a second. Let me show you something. All right. Most people aren't ready to acquire their own home or acquire rental property or anything like that yet. Actually, and you're going to hear me say this several times, one of the things that I learned from Bob when he was kind of passing so much of his wisdom is that, real estate should be the result. Real estate is the byproduct of financial literacy. Let me say that again. It's the byproduct of financial literacy. Have you ever seen someone call themselves become a real estate investor? They get into real estate and they lose their shirt and their hat and their shoes and everything else. Part of the reason why is because they jumped too soon. They went out there thinking that all they had to do to become a real estate investor was just pick up some property because they had some money, right? I see that all the time. People say, hey, if I got money, I'm just going to go ahead and buy a house. But the problem is they still don't have financial literacy. And then it comes down, at a crashing end. It ends really bad. So let's go back to strategically engineering wealth, because if there's one thing that I do see, some middle class or poor folks doing right sometimes, is how many of you seen people before where maybe they get into their retirement age, and the one thing that they did right, they probably weren't a big investor in stocks, their 401k probably wasn't there, but my goodness, if there's the one thing that they did right, thank goodness they bought a house. Thank goodness somewhere in their lifetime they bought their own home, right? And now they paid it off. And maybe because the house is too big, the kids have moved out or something like that, maybe now they sell the house and now they end up with a couple $100,000 $300,000, right, in their savings as a result, right? Or are they able to refinance and pull cash out? Who knows? But if there's nothing else that they did right in their life, it's the fact that they did buy real estate. The problem is it takes them 15 or 30 years because of the mortgage, right, to be able to do that. So I want to show you something here. This is what we talk about this is what I'm talking about when I say strategically engineering wealth. Strategically engineering wealth means that I have a couple different columns here. There's a blue column you see up here. There's an orange one. There's a green one. And there's a yellow one also, but quite frankly, that's very advanced, and I'm not going to talk about that today. I'm just going to focus on these three basic ones. The blue in Atlanta, and you'll have to plug in your own number for where you live. You may be in an area where this is not your average price house, but in Atlanta, the average price of a house is about $190,000. Okay, so I'm sticking with that number, and let's just say we got a 5% interest rate. It's a 30-year mortgage, so that means we have 360 payments. That means the monthly payment on this mortgage is $1,019.96. And so you can see here the years to pay off is 30 years to pay off. The interest paid, notice that, the interest paid is $177,186. In other words, that's interest in addition to the $190,000 purchase price. Down here, you can see at the bottom, you can see this blue line shows, a person, if you in other words, you have no savings, right? You're paying the bank, almost twice what you end up paying for the house because you paid interest, right? So there's no savings here going out the entire 30 years. This next line here, the orange line here, this is showing where you'd be if you went by the traditional rules of what society tells us to do. Society says, hey, if you'd like to be able to pay your mortgage off faster, send some extra payments sometimes. Go ahead and send some extra payments to the bank, apply it towards principal, and you'll be able to save on the payment time, payoff time of your house. Is that true? Sure, it's true. You can actually see here, right? If you just sent an extra $200 maybe in extra payments, you can see here instead of 30 years to pay off, you'd have 21 years to pay it off, and you would save $60,065 in interest. That's represented here by the orange line, okay? But I'm going to come back to that for a second. I'm going to skip over that because I want to go to the green section here. The green section here is where we are doing something called debt acceleration. Debt acceleration means that, banks have a lot of instruments, right? Have a lot of instruments, products for sale. Some of them you understand, some of them you don't. Did you know that the bank has an instrument that actually helps you to be able to pay off your house a whole lot faster? Do you think they talk about it very much, though? If they may talk about it, but they might not mention it from the standpoint of how you would be able to use it for paying off your house faster, right? And it's really a line of credit. A line of credit can range anywhere from about 4 to 6% as an interest rate. Now, let me point out something here for a second. Let me bring home something that's really, really important. Let's go back here to this blue line. Remember in the blue line when we talked about the $190,000 principal balance? Okay, let me show you something interesting. This is an amortization calculator. And so the amortization calculator here shows the exact same thing. I'm just going to go into a little bit more detail. This is the $190,000 purchase price that we talked about, right, for 30 years at that 5% rate. The only difference is I'm going to show the amortization calculator. So for a $190,000 house, remember we already said that you're paying extra interest of $177,185.60. So that means by the time you've paid off this $190,000 house, you'll have paid off $367,185.60. Let's go and look at this amortization schedule here. So this section here represents the cumulative principal. That's the principal that you're paying, all right, an amount you originally borrowed. And here shows the accumulated interest. This is what you've been paying towards the bank. So in the first year, you've paid in principal to pay this loan down $2,803.19. But you've paid in interest to the bank $9,436.33. In year two, you would have paid in principal $5,749.78, but you would have paid in interest to the bank $18,729.26. At the end of year three, you would have paid in principal $8,847.13, but you would have paid in interest In year three, $27,871.43. I know you're saying, make it stop, Rob, make it stop. All right, this is the last one here. In year four, you paid in principal $12,102.94 towards paying down this loan, but you've paid in interest $36,855.14. Can you see that in year four? You've paid 3 times the amount that you've paid in principal to the bank. This is important. Hopefully you got a pen, because everything that I'm telling you today is going to dovetail off of another lesson. So if you don't write some of this stuff down, you're not going to be able to catch some of the lessons. So notice that all interest is an additional profit on top of the principal. You're going to see why I'm telling you that later. Interest is additional profit on top of the principal. Okay, so let's get out of this. Let's get out of this. Let's go back to where we were. Okay, so let's examine what can we do here differently. Remember I said that, first of all, this is the reason why I showed you this. This is the reason why I showed you this. So if we scroll all the way down here to the bottom, to the end of 30 years, this is the principal. This is the principal that you've paid. This is the interest that you've paid. Now, I wasn't all that great in mathematics in school, but does that look like 5% to you? See, Einstein was famous for saying that those who understand interest earn it. Those who don't understand interest pay it. They're telling you that this is a 5% mortgage. Excuse me, $190,000 principal, and you have to pay back $177,186.40. Does that look like 5% to you? If I lent you $190,000, you were my friend, and then I said, hey, you know what? I really need that money back. Can you pay me back that money? And you say, sure, Rob, or what I owe you. And I say $177,186.40. Would we still be friends? See, this is the reason why understanding interest is so important, okay? Strategically engineer wealth. Let's be strategic with this. All we want to do is we want to figure out, is there a way, instead of having to wait 30 years, instead of having to wait 15 years, is there a way that we can be able to pay off our mortgage faster? And then if the only thing we did right was buy our own home, at least we can get that big lump sum of cash faster, right? Because notice, the payoff time in the traditional way was 30 years. The payoff time with us, with the debt acceleration strategy we're talking about, can be 15.42 years. Obviously, that's not 5% that we just showed you. Most people don't know the difference between amortized interest and simple interest, all these different types of interest. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to build off of the first lesson, which is recover cash, right? So if we show you how to recover cash, to stop the leakage, to set up an entity, right? That would be legal knowledge, right? If we showed you how to be able to do that and to be able to use a line of credit, let's just say, to be able to reduce some of your expenses. You see here in this example, we got you making, let's just say, $5,000 net income per month and $4,500 in expenses per month. So you have a free cash flow of just $500, okay? Now, this is where most people probably are. They got free cash flow of $500, right? When people are joining our team and they're saying, hey, Rob, I'd love to get started, and then I take a look at their financial picture, they don't have much discretionary income. Remember what I said about people living off of 7% of their income? Here's another big epiphany, if you will. When people say, hey, you can pay off your mortgage a lot faster if you just send some extra payments towards the bank. Well, take a look at this example. If a person has an extra $500 and that's all they have to live on, do you really think that they're going to take that advice of paying an extra $200 to the mortgage company? Heck no. They're going to be like, I just reduced my purchase power and I only have $300 free cash flow. That makes absolutely no sense. So the odds of them being able to save this $60,000 and $65 is very slim to no chance. But what I'm going to show you here is that if you just end up using this debt acceleration strategy, where all it is kind of using a line of credit, and we can show you how to be able to get that. Between us reducing the taxes that you owe, between us setting up an entity for you, between us setting up this debt acceleration account for you, perhaps we're able to bring this expense down. Now, how can we bring expenses down? Let me give you an example. Okay, let's pull up something here. Many instances I see I see many instances where people join our team, and when I look at their financial picture, sometimes what they've done is they've got credit cards, right? They got a bunch of credit cards, and if you were to add all of these credit cards up, they may total $1,000 or $1,500 or more, right? Obviously, this makes up the amount of expenses that's leaving their household. Now, one of the things we can do while setting up this debt acceleration account is we can get those consolidated, right? Most people don't understand how to be able to calculate that kind of thing. If you take $1,000, say we took that $1,000, we divide that by 365, right? What can that be? Hold on a second. I got to pull out my calculator here. Now I got to be nerdy. Let me be nerdy for 1 second. My calculator is going to be probably upside down. All right, so we take that $1,000, right, divided by 365. So that's going to be $2.7 per day. All right, so we multiply that times 31-day period. That means we can change that $1,000 that we just talked about. We can change that $1,000 expense that this person is having down to perhaps just $84, almost $85, right? Would that help someone in terms of their lifestyle and expenses? Absolutely, that would help them, right? So let's go ahead and talk about that. So if I could turn this into, what was that? That equaled 2.7 and 2.7 times 31. We said equaled, let's round it off, $85 a day. So if I can turn, here's where I'm going with all this. If we could do this for you, suppose we took this $4,500 in expenses. If $1,000 of that was credit cards, practically, and we were able to reduce that those expenses from $4,500 down to about $1,000 less. Do you see what the payoff time here is so far with us using this debt acceleration program here? If we use the debt acceleration strategy and we go from you having $4,500 in expenses, watch the payoff time here. It's 15 years and 15.42 years. If we reduce the monthly expenses here now by $3,500, see what the payoff time is now? 8 years. And you're saving $136,112. Do you see on this chart reflected the payoff time here? Now, I'll show you, this isn't really appropriate time now because we're in step 2. We're still just covering some basics. Do you see how this green line here shows sort of a staggered line where the rest of them are straight? I'm going to show you how you will combine that line of credit with another instrument in the bank so that what you're doing is you're really staggering, killing the interest by combining 2 different tools and instruments that the banks have at their disposal. They just didn't plan for you to use them together. This is what people in stocks sometimes refer to as dollar cost averaging, right? They end up getting a stable rate of return because they buy stock whether it goes up or whether it goes down, and as a result, they end up having what they call dollar cost averaging. They get an average rate of return, right? So what's cool about this is we're going to show you how you can take some of your income, and instead of having to rely on this additional $200 and not be able to have anything to live on, we're going to show you how taking 2 bank instruments is going to offset your interest. And instead of waiting 30 years, you can see here, you can possibly be in a position to pay it off in 8. Would that be of value to you? Okay, that's an example of strategically engineering wealth. Okay, so even if you never ended up being a real estate investor, so now you're putting yourself into a position to where, wow, you know, I got some additional capital, I've got some equity in the property, I've got the ability to borrow, right? And you're not even an investor yet. Okay, good. So now let me minimize this. Actually, I'll just push it up here. All right, so what's the next level? The next level here, well, the next step, remember we've been talking about 5 principles, right? I'm not going to save this one. The next principle that's really important is to accelerate your investing. Okay, wanted to write that down. All right, so accelerate your investing. Remember I said that real estate investing is a byproduct of financial literacy, right? So I would say here we've been doing pretty well. because we've recovered cash, right? We've stopped the leakage of the government taking, some 60 some odd percent, or 73% in this case, right? If you're middle class and poor, we've stopped the government taking 73%. Oh gosh, I made that wrong. 93%. We've stopped the government from taking 93% of our cash, right? And now we've been able to put it back and to help our own family. Strategically engineer wealth. Now we've been able to really understand how interest works so that it benefits us instead of benefiting the bank. Now, if you understand those basics at home, now you're ready to start accelerating your investing. Okay. So what type of investing might you do? Okay. It depends. We have a person on our team named Sandra Ostrander. Now, Sandra wanted to get into real estate investing. She's been wanting to do this full time for quite some time. She ran into a property where the value, we call this after repair value, the after repair value on that property was $175,000. Now, let me ask you a question. When when a person is wanting to sell a property and you're wanting to buy a property, what is usually the protocol? The protocol is usually the seller is going to make you an offer, and then you as the buyer, when you make your offer, is it lower or higher? Right? It's usually lower, right? You're the buyer. You know how it goes. They go low, they go high, you go low. That's the way it's traditionally done. Unless you've been trained. Remember what I said earlier? That a person who understands interest earns it. A person who doesn't pays it. Remember one of the lessons that when I showed you the amortization schedule, I said all interest is it's a profit on top of the principal. Try this on for size. While everyone else is just doing the strategic, the traditional, I go low, you go high. How about doing what Sandra did? Here's a person selling their home, and they said, hey, I want $175,000 for my house. And what most people are expecting, what most sellers are expecting, is for someone to negotiate and go back and forth. But here's what Sandra does. Tell me if this sounds weird. Sandra says, okay, so you want $175,000 for your house. Okay, I tell you what I'll do. How about I make you an offer? Hopefully this works out for you. How about I make you an offer of $201,000? Would that work for you? Can you imagine the look on the seller's face? What? Yeah, I know you. I know you were expecting 100. I mean, you're obviously selling because you want to be able to make as much money as you can on the property, right? Well, yeah. Okay, well, I just calculated that if I offered you, if I offered you 5% interest, perhaps, offered you 5% interest and payments of, $939 a month, then I can actually pay you an annuity per month that you can actually will to your children if you'd like to. So you plan on paying me in monthly installments. Does the average person realize that they can be paid in monthly installments? Does the average person realize that the same way that the bank just had that truth in lending statement where it showed you the ungodly amount, right, that they could that they're paying to the bank, did the average person realize that they could actually be a bank themselves? In this case, the homeowner owned this property free and clear. What do you know about most older people when they get into their older age? What is it that they crave most? Residual income, right? Not necessarily lump sum of cash. We just talked about lump sums of cash. Lump sums of cash, if you don't play this right, you could get taxed and most of it end up going towards the government. However, they would love to have some income stream, an income stream that they can count on, right? All Sandra did, let's go back here again to our calculator. All Sandra did is, let's clear this out. So 201,000, right, minus the 175. Can you see how they're paying an additional $26,000 roughly over and above? Because remember we said that interest is profit over and above the principal, right? So when she said, hey, I'm going to offer you $201,000, most people are thinking that's the purchase price. No, she's just saying by the time we finish paying you with interest, you will receive $201,000, the principal plus the interest. Let's go back. I don't want to make this too confusing. So let's go back here for a second, because how is Sandra going to make a profit here? How she's going to make a profit is because this is on the buying side. On the sale side, Sandra is going to sell this property for $205,000. Okay, so she's selling it for $205,000. This isn't with interest. This is real principal. She's going to sell it on a lease option here. So how much equity does she have between the $175,000 and the $205,000? She's got there, what's that? About $30,000, right? Let's make sure we're clear on this. I don't know if you guys have a calculator or not, so let's make sure we're clear on this. All right, so we got $205,000 minus the 175. You can see she's making $30,000. Okay, she's going to sell that on a lease option. That means she owns it now because she's done this owner financing. This strategy, by the way, is called owner financing, or yeah, let's just do owner financing. If she sells this on a lease option, in other words, giving someone the ability to be able to qualify for a house without having to go to a bank, is that a better deal than the traditional bank is offering? Absolutely, it's a better deal than the traditional bank is offering. So what she's going to do is she's going to receive a $5,000 down payment from her buyer. And the mortgage payments, if you remember correctly, the mortgage payments that Sandra is going to make to her seller, she's going to make payments of $939 a month. Now, what Sandra had to do when she was acquiring this, by the way, she put about, in repairs, she put about $930 into repairs. Plus, as a down payment, this is the part that's going to kill you. She did $10 as a down payment to buy the house, that is. So what Sandra's got into this property so far, she's got $940 into it. Okay? But she's received a $5,000 down payment, and she's receiving, in terms of rent from her buyer on the sale side, she's receiving $1,395 per month. Okay, so let's take a look at this. So far, Sandra's made $5,000. Okay, here. And if you can remember, this is a $30,000 equity difference, right? $30,000 equity difference. So if she received $5,000 already, that means she still has $25K that's still due to her on the back end when this buyer qualifies to be able to buy that house. Okay, but let's go ahead and fast forward. So on a monthly basis, she's got $1,395 minus the $939. She's making as cash flow $456 per month. Okay, 400, and let's start a new page here. Let's save this for a second. So if she's making $456 a month times 12, do you realize that Sandra is making about $5,472 a year? Rob, where are you going with this? Here's where I'm going with this. Because Sandra was trained in understanding owner financing, not having to go to a traditional bank, and then she understood how to be able to play the middleman, right, and turn right around and sell creative financing to someone. Remember, we talked earlier about rate of return, okay? We talked about how to calculate, we talked about the rule of 72. I'm going to show you rate of return. So here's something else you need to know. The way you calculate rate of return, ROI, the way you calculate that, you calculate ROI by it's the amount of money you made divided by the amount of money you invested. Well, that will give you a number that you'll have to multiply by 100, and that will actually equal your return on investment. Well, how much money did Sandra make here? Okay, she's made $5,472 just in cash flow, but she also made another $5,000 in down payment, which means she made $10,472 in terms of what her revenue was, right? How much did she have invested? If you remember, she had invested $940. Okay. Now, I know you got to multiply it by 100 to take it and put it in decimal form, etc. But you're going to realize that Sandra made about 1,114% as a rate of return. Is that better than the bank is paying you now? Is that better than mutual funds or stocks? Here's why this is even more important, not just the rate of return, but remember this. Remember I said everything I'm going to show you today is going to build on one thing or another. Okay, remember this. Where did I put that? Remember when we talked about the rule of 72, when we talked about how long it takes for your money to double? Well, guess what? If you're only making 5% rate of return, it took 14 and a half years, how long, how many years is it going to take for Sandra's money to double when she's making 1,100%? That's a trick question. It's not going to take years for her money to double, because if she's only got $940 invested and each month she's making $456, you can see in month 3 she's way more than made her money back, right? So she's made her money back after the first couple of months, right? Do you see why accelerating your investing is so important? Because this is instrumental in you not having to wait so long for your money to work for you. Right? That's an example of owner financing. Okay, that's one example. Right? Let's talk about another person on our team. Another person on our team here is a guy named Mark Wheaton. Now, Mark Wheaton, my wife and I manage a team of about over 200 real estate investors, actually, that span across about 13 states. Mark Wheaton is out of California. And so Mark Wheaton, he wanted to specialize actually in wholesaling. Now, I don't know how many of you have ever watched shows like Flip This House, okay? But I have a little issue with that show, Flip This House. The reason why I have an issue with it is because the show doesn't tell the entire story. It starts off with an investor. All you really watched on when you're watching that show is you're watching buy low and sell high. The show starts off with an investor who has an ugly house. By the time the show is over, it's a pretty house, owner occupant lives in it. The problem I have with it is that when the show starts off, it doesn't tell you where that investor usually got that ugly house from. Because if they were to tell you that, you'd realize that not everyone buys property low and sells high. Let me minimize the screen so that you can actually see me here for a second. Okay, so I want to make sure I can actually see you for a second. All right. So when you're watching shows like Flip This House, people don't really realize that not everyone makes their money buying low and selling high. There's another type of investor that the person that you're watching the show on, the person that you're watching the show, there's what we call, as in real estate investing, we call them the retailer. Okay. However, everyone doesn't make their money that way. Usually where they got that property from is from another investor who doesn't make their money buying low and selling high. They make their money buying low and selling low. That's called wholesaling. I'll give you an analogy. Anyone can walk into a Walmart and say, hey, Walmart has really low prices, right? But it takes someone a little bit more observant to walk into Walmart and say, if you think Walmart has low prices, who supplies Walmart? They must really have low prices. Someone has to buy property. Someone has to buy equipment at such a low price, still be able to mark it up and sell it at a little bit higher amount, but it's still such a low price that even Walmart can't refuse it. So they can buy it and sell it to us retail. Does that make sense? And so what most people don't talk about is in the real estate field is that there's a group of investors that come before the retailers that you will typically see on television, and they make a lot of money. And the good thing is they make a lot of money in a way that most people don't really think about. In other words, let me give you an example here. I'll go back. Here's what I want to show you. So Mark Wheaton, what he ended up doing, okay, great. So what Mark Wheaton ended up doing, here, no, cancel that, is he ended up finding a property that was worth, after repair value, $245,000. Now, there are some rules about what you should offer on a property so that you can know that you're going to make money. Many people don't understand this. Again, you've heard of investors that end up buying a property and they end up losing their shirt because they just didn't know what the heck they're doing. Here's something that gets said in the real estate community. what gets said in the real estate community is that investors, we make our money when we buy. We just realize the cash when we sell. Let that sink in again. We make our money when we buy. We realize the cash when we sell. One of the things that I do at our office sometimes is I take someone who has no real estate experience and I pull out my phone, right? I pull out my iPhone and I say, hey, look, here's my iPhone here. And I say, for my iPhone, whatever my little phone here, I say, for my iPhone, would you give me $20 for it? And they say, well, sure. And I say, well, why would you give me $20 for it? And they stop and say, well, because I know that I could sell it for more if I wanted to. And I said, right, okay, good point. And I said, well, here's my iPhone. Would you give me $500 for it? And they say, well, no. And I said, why not? And they says, because it's probably not worth that. And I'd be stuck with it if I didn't want the phone. And I said, exactly. I said, you probably don't realize what you just said. You don't even have to be a real estate investor to catch this. What you said is the reason why you were willing to jump on it at $20 is because you know the lower the amount that you pay, right? The lower the purchase price, the safer it is. The more it increases the odds that you could have different exit strategies, right? It increases your exits, right? Because, hey, if you bought it for $20, you can turn right around and keep it and say, hey, I got a great deal for 20 bucks. You can turn right around and lease it. I don't know who would want to lease a phone, but you could if you wanted to. You can turn right around and lease it and make some money. You can turn right around and sell it. You got a whole plethora of different exit strategies simply because you bought right. Does that make sense? And the reason why you didn't want to pay $500 for the phone is because if you paid $500 for the phone, you'd be stuck. If you didn't want the phone, you got stuck. And there's no way you'd be able to lease it or sell it. Does that make sense? In other words, when people lose money that are calling themselves real estate investors, they don't realize they didn't lose money. They didn't lose money later when they try to sell it. No, you lost money the day you overpaid. You just realized when you tried to go and sell it. Okay. So in other words, there's a formula. There's a formula when it's talking about fix and flip. If Sandra Ostranda did owner finance, what I'm discussing now is understanding fix and flip. Okay. Or at least a certain area of fix and flip. This is really this is a division of fix and flip. This is wholesaling. Because Mark Wheaton understood this formula. He understood that for a $245,000 house, I can't pay $245,000 for it. So what he ended up doing is he said, okay, what I'm going to need to do is I'm going to make an offer of about $145,000 for it. Now, this property needed about in repairs, it needed $15,000 in repairs. So how much is Mark Wheaton in this for between the purchase price and the repairs? Can everyone see that he's in this for $160,000? Okay. And so what Mark ended up doing is Mark ended up selling this property for $180,000. So how much does Mark make? You can see he makes $20,000 profit. Now, this is why I'm bringing this up. I'm bringing this to your attention because remember I talked about that show, Flip This House? Okay. When you are watching shows like Flip This House, let me change colors here. When you're watching shows like Flip This House, what you're basically watching is you're watching a retailer who probably picked this property up for $180,000, right? They put some $15,000 worth of work into that property, and then they end up selling it for the $245,000. But what no one ever, this is the reason why the general public thinks that in order to get into real estate investing, that you have to have cash or credit, because the show starts off with a person paying $180,000 for a house. They're like, wow, he paid $180,000. That costs money. Then you see them paying contractors, right, to make these $15,000 in repairs. Hey, they're paying contractors to do the work. Hey, that takes money. And if they paid $180,000 house for the house, they probably had to use credit also. It's no wonder society thinks that in order to be a real estate investor, it takes cash and credit. No one ever stops to think, wait a minute. Who is the person who sold? Yes, there's some equity between this 180 and 245, but who's the person who sold between that 160 and 180? That's the person who never made television. What were they selling? Mark Wheaton was not selling a house. Mark Wheaton was selling the contract. This is important. He's selling the contract. All Mark does is he drives through the neighborhoods and he looks for properties that he can get at a deep discount. So for a wholesaler, what their job is to find great deals. His job is to find the property. His job is to negotiate the purchase price. His job is to estimate the repairs. His job is to write up the contract. And then at the last minute, he just assigns that contract over to the retailer that you see on shows like Flip This House. So if he's selling the contract, here's my question to you. Do you need good credit to fill out a sheet of paper? No, you don't. So there goes one of the biggest myths about real estate investing is that you need good credit. No, all he did was he sold a contract. You don't need good credit to get into real estate investing if you're going to be a wholesaler, but wholesaling doesn't make television. Well, there goes one of the myths. Well, if you don't need good credit, then Rob, you need a lot of cash. Wait a minute. How much money do you think Mark Wheaton put down on this property? You know how much he put down? $10. You can barely get out of Starbucks for $10, right? Now, let me tell you why you're probably having heartburn with that $10 amount right now. You're probably having heartburn with it because most of what society learns about real estate investing, most of what we learn about real estate investing, we learn from real estate agents, right? A real estate agent, for the most part, when they are selling a property, they've learned that the more money that a person puts down, the more money that a person puts down on a property, the greater the odds are that this person is going to buy because, hey, they got some skin in the game. I do the same thing if I was a real estate investor too. But now society thinks that in order for them to buy a property that they have to put thousands of dollars down. Not true. The definition of what you, in other words, what you're putting down, the money you're putting down is called consideration. The definition of consideration is what you give in exchange for having received something. Let me say that again. It's what you give in exchange for having received something. Did you even hear me say money? No. Which is the reason why, if you look on some of the older deeds that are on record, right there embedded in the deed, you'll see it says, deeded with love and affection. I love you, man. I do if you're selling your house for $10, right? But listen, that doesn't mean that it's always $10. But in some states, there are minimal legal requirements to be able to acquire a property, but it's nowhere near the $1,000, which is my point. It's usually somewhere in the neighborhood of about $10. So we just shot down two of the biggest myths that is going around about real estate investing is that it takes a lot of cash, and it takes a lot of credit to be a real estate investor. Okay, so we just talked about there strategy number 3 or principle number 3, right? Accelerate your investing. And incidentally, Mark Wheaton didn't just do that wholesale deal where he made $20,000 on. He actually sold 2 properties. He drove through that same neighborhood. He used to be in sales. Mark used to make 7 figures a year, right? He used to be a millionaire just from sales. He joined our team in 2014. He said, the reason, Rob, why I'm joining your team is because, you know what, I lost that 7-figure a year business. I ended up going through a nasty divorce custody battle. If I was smart, I would have used real estate to secure my income. And so he was really starting over. But because he had a background in sales, Mark was, I told Mark, I said, listen, if you have a background in sales, you're probably used to running big sales teams. You're used to being on the phones. He said, you're absolutely right. I'm used to making 80 phone calls in a day. And so Mark started driving through these neighborhoods. He started calling on some of these houses that he thought looked dilapidated. And he ended up not just doing $20,000, making $20,000 on that real estate deal. He ended up making an additional $15,000 on another property in that same neighborhood because he made so many calls. He made $35,000 in 9 days simply from wholesaling. Okay, so that's an example. We're on principle number 3, which is accelerate your investing. So now let's talk about another principle. We just gone through accelerating your investing. You know what? Before we get to accelerating and investing, let's start talking about how are people learning this stuff. Well, let's do one other. Before I give you number 4. Let me give you one other strategy here. Okay, so here, let's talk about number 4. Let's save that. And let's go back to our principles. So we left off with accelerate your investing. The next level here is scale your business. Now, what does scale your business mean? Now, obviously, if you can take a look here, we started off with plugging the leaks. Then we started close to home, right? And by the way, I refer to that as debt acceleration because it doesn't just apply to mortgages. So if you just happen to be watching this and you're like, "But Rob, I don't own a home," that's okay. The strategy that I can show you how to implement, it works for anything that bears interest. Okay, so you can start paying off your car, you can start paying off your credit cards, it can be your student loan. The important thing is start strategically engineering wealth by starting to minimize or cancel a lot of the interest that you're overpaying for. Okay, so once you started strategically engineering wealth, then we shifted over to talking about accelerating your investing, right? Because we said real estate is meant to be a byproduct of financial literacy. I gave you an example of owner financing, and then we went over into wholesaling. And so once you start, there could be a variety of different strategies that you want to specialize in. I'm not assuming that you want to do owner financing or wholesaling. There's a lot of different areas you can go into. But once you figure out what you want to go into, then the next step is we need to figure out how to scale your business. What does that mean? Scaling your business means let's take your business to the next level. So far, you've been doing all this investing based on your own production. Is there a way that you can kick your business into overdrive by bringing teams on or automation? Okay, so let me give you an example here. We got another person on our team. This is a guy by the name of John Mangum. Because I have no idea if you're watching this, if you're a brand new real estate investor, or if you're seasoned. If you're seasoned, hold tight for a second, because John Mangum has been investing in real estate for over 30 years. So he's very seasoned. He's a broker, he's a CPA, he's also the go-to guy in Atlanta for what's known as 1031 tax-free exchanges. That's a section of the IRS code that says if you sell properties this way or buy a property this way, you don't have to pay the capital gains, right? But you better understand that law, okay? Now, John wanted to be able to kick up his business, take it to the next level. Now, for those, I'm speaking to those who are seasoned here for a second. If you've ever been to the courthouse steps to buy foreclosures, one of the things you can attest, and let me tell you how foreclosures work. When a person goes to a foreclosure to be able to buy a property, usually what's out there, there are people called criers, right? They're usually paralegals that represent a bank. And if you are going out there in an effort to buy a property that day, that's fine. You go out there, you listen to the crier cry off a particular property, and then they'll start the bid at a certain number. If you are the highest bidder, the winning bidder, then typically you will get the property. Great. That works fine if it's only you buying one property. The problem comes in is what if you were planning on buying 9, 10 properties that day? If you're planning on buying 9 or 10 properties, odds are great that all of those properties aren't with the same bank. So here you are standing next to one crier waiting for them to cry off your property, and then there are 8 other or 9 other paralegals also trying to cry off those properties. You can't be in more places, 10 places at once, right? So can you see how even a seasoned investor at some point is going to need to understand how to scale their business? Well, here's something that John did. John said when he first joined our team, John said, "Rob, one of the things we need to do is we need to help an investor get to their first real estate deal. Because until that happens, they think that always happens to the other guy." And I said, "So what are you proposing, John?" And John said, "Well, what I'm proposing is how about we buy a property off the courthouse steps, put it in an LLC, then bring it back to our community and add several members as co-owners of the LLC. I know they're brand new investors, but there's some things, even new investors, we can train them on. We can train them to go to the courthouse steps and show them how to bid, right?" And I say, "Yeah, we can train that person to come back to the house and show them how to paint, show them how to do marketing and get a rate of return. And then they have some experience." It's seasoned investors working in tandem with new investors in a way that they're protected. I said, "This is awesome, John." And so what John had ended up proposing is we ended up buying a property for $15,000. Okay, that's what we bought it for. Renovation and holding costs, I believe, was something like $11,496. Renovation and holding cost here. So all said and done, we were in it for 26,000. $496. Okay. Now that was our all-in cost. We ended up selling this for, in 60 days, less than 60 days, we sold for $48,500. Okay. So we ended up getting a profit of, I know there's, I know it comes out to like 22,000 or some odd dollars, but after sales costs, we ended up making a profit of about $18,076. That's a 67% cash on cash rate of return, guys. 67% cash on cash rate of return. But that's not the reason why I'm telling you this story. First of all, this was a fix and flip. Remember, we talked about wholesaling in the last one. This was a fix and flip. But this isn't the reason why I'm telling you this story. The reason why I'm telling you this story is, let me go ahead and shift over here to another screen. The reason why I'm telling you this story is what John did that was pretty ingenious. A lot of times when I'm speaking to people and I'm telling them about this deal, we had 9 investors, including John. We had 9 investors in that project. Because remember, the goal was to just take junior level investors, have them work with senior level investors in a way that they can learn from a senior investor. And more often than not, when I tell this story, a lot of even seasoned people ask me, oh, wow, so you had all those people working together. How did you guys decide who was going to get paid what? Glad you asked. This was brilliant. John said, listen, a classic example of a real estate deal, if you think about it, what usually happens is, yeah, I know there's a lot of different ways to partner, but classic example of a real estate deal is a partnership between labor and capital, right? Labor is usually the know-how, right? Some investor says, hey, I know how to invest in real estate. Problem is, I don't have the what? I don't have the cash. So typically what usually happens, not all the time, but usually what happens is the investor, right? The investor who has the know-how, usually what they'll do is they'll say, hey, if you give me the cash, maybe we'll enter into a 50-50 sort of relationship, okay? Because I wouldn't be able to do this deal without the cash, right? Here's why this classic formula that John came up with was awesome. So what we did over here is we had 9 investors. That's 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You get the gist. We had 9 investors. This was John included at the top. So it really is 8 other investors, right? Now, obviously, what we did is we had them all put in a certain amount of capital, right? Each one of them put in a certain amount of capital. Now, let's use this lady here, Lori. Lori was, let me erase this. This lady here, Lori, she ended up putting in $1,000. Okay. Now, obviously, all these different people in the list, they put in different amounts, but I'm sure you can attest that once you get to the bottom, all of that is going to equal 100% of the investment. Does that make sense? Hopefully that makes sense. Everyone put in different amounts, but no matter how you slice it, including John's investment, it equals 100%. Okay. But we're not just doing this. We weren't just doing that project so people can puff their chest out and say, hey, I put in more than you, blah, blah, blah. No, we were doing this so that our new investors as part of our team can also get experience. And so the experience comes in from the labor. So we took them over to the house. We created a punch list on the kitchen counter. And we said, here's how this is going to work, guys. You guys are going to come here and volunteer your time. You're going to look on that punch list. You're going to write down when you clocked in. You're going to write down what you accomplished on that punch list, and you're also going to write down when you clocked out, so that on the labor side, we have a list of hours of how long you were here. Here's why I'm bringing this out, okay? Lori only put down $1,000 when we were buying this property together. That only represented 4.4% of the investment in terms of all the capital that we raised. But over what we did is we had them all put in a certain amount of capital, right? Each one of them put in a certain amount of capital. Now, let's use this lady here, Lori. Lori was, let me erase this. This lady here, Lori, she ended up putting in $1,000. Okay. Now, obviously, all these different people in the list, they put in different amounts, but I'm sure you can attest that once you get to the bottom, all of that is going to equal 100% of the investment. Does that make sense? Hopefully that makes sense. Everyone put in different amounts, but no matter how you slice it, including John's investment, it equals 100%. Okay. But we're not just doing this. We weren't just doing that project so people can puff their chest out and say, hey, I put in more than you, blah, blah, blah. No, we were doing this so that our new investors as part of our team can also get experience. And so the experience comes in from the labor. So we took them over to the house. We created a punch list on the kitchen counter. And we said, here's how this is going to work, guys. You guys are going to come here and volunteer your time. You're going to look on that punch list. You're going to write down when you clocked in. You're going to write down what you accomplished on that punch list, and you're also going to write down when you clocked out, so that on the labor side, we have a list of hours of how long you were here. Here's why I'm bringing this out, okay? Lori only put down $1,000 when we were buying this property together. That only represented 4.4% of the investment in terms of all the capital that we raised. But over here, if you were to track Lori to see how many hours she worked, Lori put in a whopping 101 hours on this project. That represented 26.4% of all the hours that were added to this project. Well, remember I said that we made $18,076? So if we take $18,076, right? If we divide that 18,076, I'm writing it across this line for a reason, because if we split that 50-50, that means $9,038 goes towards labor, 9,038 towards capital, right? Lori would get 26.4% of this. That means she's made $2,386 here, and she's made $397 because of the 4.4% here. Can you see how Lori has made, if you add these up, can you see how Lori as a brand new investor made 278% rate of return simply by working with a seasoned investor? This is win-win. I want to point out, I know you may be lost in why I'm bringing this up. John just accomplished two things in one fell swoop. One thing that he was able to accomplish is he was able to accomplish having 8 other real estate investors learn the business, so that if they work with him on one project and they can see this from acquisition all the way to sales, now when he has someone standing on the courthouse steps with him, he's not dealing with newbies, he's dealing with someone who's trained. It's a win for John. He can buy 10 houses on the courthouse steps instead of buying one. Is it a win for a seasoned investor? Absolutely. But then Lori here is a new investor. Lori here hasn't done fix and flip. If she goes from having done fix and flip to 278% rate of return, does she also win? Yes, she also wins, and she keeps increasing her knowledge and shortening her learning curve because she's working with someone seasoned. Does that make sense? Gosh, we've taken the knowledge that we've learned from Bob, and we've been able to share it, not in a seminar way where the guru flies out of town and leaves you stranded with an 800 number and an email address. We've been able to share that knowledge through a community fashion, right? And so that our team can expand and flourish into all these different locations. And what that's done is we've taken that stuff, in an office, and then we took it out to the streets into something called profit caravans. Our profit caravans in the very beginning, we only had, I remember in January of 2011, our first profit caravan only had 6 people in attendance. Our last profit caravan, as you can see here, had almost 100 people in attendance. This is not a fad by any stretch of the imagination. We get people who come out and they're amazed. It's not like the Profit Caravan lasts all day. It's from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. And in that 2-hour time period, we cover 2 fix and flips that different people on our team have. And we also cover a terms deal. Terms is buying properties with nothing down and without any credit. Most people have heard that you can buy properties that way, but most people have never met anyone who's done that. Now you fall into one of 3 categories. Either you're number 3 and all the stuff that I just said is not your cup of tea. I'm 100% okay with that, because everything isn't for everybody, right? Hey, I'm on YouTube. So even if you're not going to join us, I'm on YouTube. Why don't you go ahead, find me on YouTube, like me, share one of our videos, even subscribe to me.